The courtroom doors opened slowly that cold morning as people filled the benches expecting just another routine hearing, unaware that they were about to witness a case that would stay with them forever. A case listed simply as Case No. 94731B, involving a man named Daniel Harper, quiet delivery driver in his late 30s, whose tired eyes and worn jacket already told a story long before he spoke. And when his name was called, he stepped forward nervously, clutching a folded stack of papers like a lifeline, while the judge, an experienced and respected figure known for fairness rather than fame, reviewed the file in silence. The charges, sounding severe when read aloud: multiple traffic violations, failure to appear, misuse of a commercial vehicle, falsified delivery logs, and financial liability totaling $250,000, an amount so large it caused murmurs to ripple through the room, because it was clear from one glance at Daniel that he did not belong to the world of people who could absorb such a fine. And as the prosecutor laid out the case, it seemed airtight, every violation tied to a van registered in Daniel's name. Timestamps, camera footage, electronic toll records, all pointing in one direction, while Daniel stood there saying almost nothing, only whispering yes. Your Honor, when asked if he understood the charges, his voice barely audible, his shoulders slumped, not in defiance but in exhaustion. And when the judge finally looked up and asked the simple question, "Do you have anything to say before I rule?" The room expected excuses or pleas, but instead, Daniel paused, swallowed hard, and said softly, "Your Honor, I can pay the fine. But then my daughter won't get her medicine tonight." A sentence so quietly spoken, yet so heavy that it seemed to drain the air from the room, causing even the judge to lean back slightly, his eyes narrowing not in anger, but in curiosity, because after decades on the bench, the judge had learned that sometimes the most important truth hides behind the smallest sentence. And instead of ruling immediately, he asked Daniel to explain, warning him that the court required honesty above all else, and what followed unfolded, slowly, painfully, like a confession mixed with a life story. As Daniel explained that he worked night shifts for a logistics company that leased delivery vans to independent drivers, that the van in question had been registered in his name because he lacked the credit history to qualify for the job otherwise, that the company promised to handle all compliance and logs, and that for months he trusted them because he had no other choice, working 12 to 14 hours a day while his wife stayed home caring for their daughter, Lily, who suffered from a rare autoimmune condition requiring expensive medication every week, medication not fully covered by insurance, medication that quite literally kept her alive, and as Daniel spoke, his voice cracked only once. When he explained how he often slept in the van between shifts because going home would waste time he couldn't afford, and how one night he discovered that someone else had been using the van during hours he was not scheduled, racking up violations, running red lights, skipping tolls, forging electronic signatures under his name. And when he confronted his supervisor, he was told to focus on driving and leave paperwork to management, warning disguised as advice and fearing job loss. Daniel stayed silent, because silence kept food on the table and medicine in his daughter's body, and as the judge listened, the prosecutor objected, arguing that sympathy could not override responsibility, that the law was clear: registration equals liability. But the judge raised a hand, signaling patience rather than dismissal, and asked to see the documents Daniel had been holding, which turned out to be medical invoices, pharmacy receipts, hospital letters, work schedules, and most importantly, a series of emails he had sent months earlier to the company reporting unauthorized use of the vehicle, emails that had never been answered, and the judge's demeanor changed subtly, the way seasoned judges change when they sense that justice might be hiding in the margins rather than the statutes, prompting him to ask the court clerk to pull records associated with the van's GPS logs. And as the data appeared on the screen, a quiet pattern emerged: multiple violations, occurring during overlapping times when Daniel was logged into the company system elsewhere, times when it was physically impossible for him to be driving, and one by one, the courtroom began to realize that this was not a case of reckless disregard, but of calculated exploitation. And when the judge asked the prosecutor whether the company had been investigated, There was an uncomfortable pause, because they had not, and that pause spoke volumes, leading the judge to call a short recess, during which whispers filled the room. Some people shaking their heads, others wiping their eyes, because many recognized pieces of their own lives in Daniel's struggle. And when court resumed, the judge returned with a firmness that commanded silence, stating that while the law holds individuals accountable, it also demands that accountability be placed where it truly belongs, and then in a decision that stunned everyone present. The judge ruled that the $250,000 fine was vacated in its entirety, citing clear evidence of fraud, coercion, and misrepresentation by the logistics company, further ordering an immediate referral for criminal investigation into corporate misconduct, identity falsification, and labor exploitation. And his gasps echoed through the courtroom, the judge turned back to Daniel and said words that would later be repeated far beyond that room. "Mr. Harper, the law exists to protect people like you, not to crush them when they are already carrying more than their share." And then, in a moment that blurred the line between authority and humanity, the judge ordered the return of all seized wages, waived court costs, and instructed the clerk to connect Daniel with a workers' rights advocate present in the building, ensuring he would not walk out alone. And as Daniel stood there, tears streaming freely now, he tried to speak, but couldn't, managing only a nod, because relief, when it finally arrives after prolonged fear, often steals language away, and as he left the courtroom, people stood not in applause, but in quiet respect, because they had witnessed something rare. It's not just a legal victory, but a restoration of dignity. And later that evening, Daniel sat beside his daughter's hospital bed, holding her small hand as she slept peacefully. Medication delivered, crisis averted, and though the world outside remained harsh and imperfect, one truth had been reaffirmed that day: that justice, when guided by listening rather than assumption, can still change lives, not through mercy alone, but through the courage to look deeper, to ask one more question, to hear one more sentence, and to remember that behind every case number is a human being hoping that the system meant to serve them will, just once, truly see them.